As global trade dynamics continue to shift, the brewing trade conflict between the United States and China appears to be reaching a critical juncture. Xi Jinping, China's president, has meticulously prepared for this moment, transforming a potential crisis into a strategic opportunity. The recent imposition of significant tariffs by the Trump administration on Chinese goods has not only heightened tensions but also enabled Xi to adopt an aggressive stance in a high-stakes game of economic leverage. The roots of this trade conflict can be traced back to April 2020, when Xi convened a meeting with senior Communist Party officials to orchestrate a response to escalating tensions with the U.S. The friction had been exacerbated by earlier tariffs and technology restrictions, which were further intensified by the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic underscored the world's dependency on Chinese manufacturing, particularly for essential supplies like surgical masks and pharmaceuticals. Instead of complying with U.S. demands for a more open economy, Xi outlined a bold strategy. China would not only maintain but enhance its dominance in global supply chains, thereby creating a deterrent to foreign interference. In the years following that pivotal meeting, Xi has significantly bolstered China's manufacturing capabilities, directing nearly $2 trillion through state-controlled banks to industrial sectors. This has allowed China to amplify its exports and consolidate its position as the world's manufacturing hub. Chinese leaders must tighten international production chains' dependence on our country, Xi articulated, reflecting a desire to flip the power dynamic and make adversaries reconsider their reliance on tariffs. As the current administration in Washington implements tariffs, China has retaliated with its own, targeting critical minerals and other essential components that are vital for numerous industries, including automotive and technology. The impact has been immediate. Prices for these critical minerals have surged, with some tripling since China announced its export curbs. This price increase has caused unease among U.S. consumers, who may soon face higher prices and empty store shelves, thereby exerting pressure on the Trump administration to reconsider its strategy. Experts suggest that Xi's approach represents a fundamental shift in China's economic strategy. It's about flipping the leverage so that the world is reliant on China and China is reliant on no one, noted Kirsten Astle, a former U.S. intelligence advisor. As this rivalry unfolds, it threatens to divide the world into conflicting spheres of influence, with the U.S. urging allies to distance themselves from China while Beijing signals consequences for those who comply. Despite this aggressive posture, China remains reliant on the West for advanced technologies, particularly in semiconductors and aerospace. Nonetheless, Xi's willingness to weaponize supply chains marks a significant departure from past approaches, demonstrating a newfound confidence in China's economic standing. The ongoing trade war has validated Xi's long-held belief that the U.S. aims to contain China's rise, emboldening him to project strength both domestically and internationally. However, the path Xi has chosen is fraught with risks. The trade war not only threatens to destabilize China's economy, which is already grappling with a property crisis and diminished consumer confidence, but it could also lead to widespread job losses if exports dwindle. Analysts caution that the very tactics Xi is employing could backfire, making China's economy vulnerable in the long run. Moreover, as Xi champions a narrative of resilience against Western aggression, he faces increasing scrutiny over the long-term viability of his strategy. While he has sought to bolster state control over the economy, this approach has stifled innovation and may ultimately hinder China's ability to sustain its growth. Experts argue that a more open economic model could benefit both China and the global community, but such reforms challenge the Communist Party's grip on power. The future remains uncertain as the U.S. and China navigate this complex landscape. While dialogue appears to be ongoing, the underlying competition over technological supremacy, particularly in domains like artificial intelligence, suggests that tensions will persist. As both nations grapple with the implications of their actions, the world watches closely, poised to see how this trade conflict will shape global economic relations for years to come. The stakes are high. And the repercussions of this unfolding drama will likely reverberate far beyond the borders of China and the United States. In a world increasingly defined by geopolitical tensions and trade disputes, few leaders have been as strategic as China's President Xi Jinping. As the trade conflict with the United States escalates under the Trump administration, Xi appears to have orchestrated a long-awaited opportunity to enhance China's dominance in global supply chains and leverage its economic power. This moment, which Xi has been preparing for since the early days of the trade war, underscores a shift in the balance of power and challenges the global order as we know it. In April 2020, amid rising tensions over tariffs and technology restrictions, Xi convened a meeting with senior Communist Party officials to outline his vision for a more assertive China. His strategy was clear: to make the world reliant on Chinese exports and technology, thereby reversing the historical dependence that China has felt on the West. "We must tighten international production chains' dependence on our country," Xi emphasized during that pivotal meeting, signaling a shift toward a more aggressive economic posture. As the trade war intensified, particularly following the imposition of hefty tariffs on Chinese goods by the Trump administration, Xi's plans began to take shape. Not only did China retaliate with its own tariffs, but it also implemented export restrictions on critical minerals and components essential to various industries, including automotive and aerospace. The ramifications were immediate, with some mineral prices tripling, creating supply shortages in the U.S. market. It's about flipping the leverage so that the world is reliant on China and China is reliant on no one, explained Kirsten Astle, a former intelligence advisor and current head of a consultancy focused on China. Despite this aggressive stance, the trade conflict reveals deeper vulnerabilities within China's economy. While Xi has fortified the country's manufacturing capabilities, directing nearly $2 trillion in loans to industrial sectors and introducing new economic warfare tactics, China still relies heavily on advanced technologies from the West, particularly in areas like semiconductors and high-end manufacturing. This reliance raises questions about the sustainability of Xi's strategy. The broader implications of this trade conflict extend beyond economic metrics. They threaten to fracture global alliances and create new geopolitical divisions. As the United States pressures its allies to limit trade with China, Beijing has countered with warnings of economic repercussions for those who comply. China will use any and all tools at its disposal to cause pain and impose costs on the U.S. and any country that aligns with America, warned Evan Medeiros, a professor at Georgetown University. As the two nations navigate these turbulent waters, the stakes are high. American policymakers have already recognized the challenges of completely severing ties with China, evidenced by exemptions for certain electronics from tariffs. Conversely, China has indicated it might reconsider its own tariffs on essential imports like semiconductors and healthcare products. Yet if the trade war continues unabated, the potential consequences for both economies could be severe, with millions of jobs at risk in China alone, as exports are a critical lifeline for its beleaguered economy. Xi's commitment to a more assertive foreign policy and economic strategy is also entwined with his domestic agenda. He aims to consolidate power and reinforce the Communist Party's control over the economy, directing resources towards state-owned enterprises rather than fostering a free market that could empower independent businesses. This approach, while politically expedient, risks further alienating China from the global community as many nations grow wary of its ambitions. As Xi prepares for upcoming international engagements, including the China-CELAC Forum, the trajectory of U.S. China relations remains uncertain. The upcoming discussions may provide a platform for both sides to explore avenues for de-escalation, but the underlying competitive dynamics suggest that the rivalry is far from over. With each side digging in, the world watches closely, keenly aware that the decisions made today will shape the contours of global power for years to come. In this evolving landscape, the question remains: can Xi navigate the treacherous waters of international trade while maintaining China's growth and stability? As the stakes rise, the answers will likely define not just a generation of Chinese leadership but the future of international relations in an increasingly multipolar world. As tensions between the United States and China escalate, the trade conflict has reached a pivotal juncture, one that Chinese President Xi Jinping has been strategically preparing for over the past few years. The trade war, initially ignited during the Trump administration, has now morphed into a complex battleground of economic power plays and geopolitical maneuvering. With both nations grappling for dominance, the implications of this ongoing rivalry are vast and undeniable. In 2020, before tariffs were even a prominent issue, Xi laid the groundwork for a more aggressive economic stance. At a meeting with senior Communist Party officials, he articulated a vision aimed at making the global economy increasingly reliant on Chinese exports and technological know-how. This approach, he argued, would provide China with leverage over adversarial nations hesitant to impose economic sanctions or trade restrictions. As he stated, Chinese leaders must tighten international production chains' dependence on our country to counter foreign disruptions. The Trump administration's tariffs on Chinese goods, which have escalated to as high as 145%, were met with retaliatory measures from Beijing, including export restrictions on critical minerals essential for various technologies. This has significantly impacted the U.S. economy, with prices of these minerals reportedly tripling since China's restrictions were implemented. Kirsten Astle, a former intelligence advisor, remarked, "It's about flipping the leverage so that the world is reliant on China. And China is reliant on no one." As both nations navigate this tumultuous landscape, the pressure to choose sides is mounting globally. The U.S. has actively encouraged its allies to limit trade with China, while Beijing has warned of repercussions for countries that align too closely with American interests. As Evan Medeiros, a Georgetown University scholar, pointedly noted, China will use any and all tools at its disposal to cause pain and impose costs on the U.S. and any country that aligns with America. While the current administration has attempted to engage in dialogue, the underlying realities of the trade war remain unchanged. The tariffs, which were designed to strengthen the U.S. economy, have instead led to a decline in American factory output and increased consumer prices. In many ways, both countries appear trapped in a cycle of escalation, with Xi Jinping viewing the trade conflict as a validation of his long-held beliefs about U.S. intentions to thwart China's rise. The economic repercussions of this conflict extend far beyond trade balances. China, while seeking to assert its economic dominance, is also grappling with internal challenges, including a property crisis and diminishing consumer confidence. Analysts warned that a prolonged trade war could result in millions of job losses within China, deeply affecting its economic stability. Recent developments indicate a slight thaw in relations, with both U.S. and Chinese officials meeting for talks in Switzerland. This meeting marks the first high-level engagement since the introduction of new tariffs in January, highlighting a mutual recognition that both economies are feeling the pressure. However, as experts suggest, these discussions are unlikely to yield immediate results. Stephen Olson, a former U.S. trade negotiator, emphasized that both parties are keen to avoid the appearance of backing down, which complicates the negotiation dynamics. Looking ahead, the future of U.S.-China relations remains uncertain. While both nations display a willingness to engage in dialogue, the entrenched positions on critical issues, ranging from subsidies for key industries to technological advancements, suggest that a comprehensive resolution will take time. As the trade war continues to unfold, the world watches closely, aware that the outcomes of these negotiations will have far-reaching consequences not only for the U.S. and China but for the global economy as a whole. In this high-stakes environment, it is clear that the strategies employed by Xi Jinping will shape the trajectory of China's international relationships and its quest for superpower status in the years to come. As the conflict deepens, the ongoing economic and political ramifications will demand careful navigation from both sides as they seek to balance national interests with the complexities of an interconnected world. In an era marked by escalating geopolitical tensions, the trade conflict ignited by the Trump administration's tariffs has opened a new chapter in U.S.-China relations. For Chinese President Xi Jinping, this confrontation represents not just a challenge but an opportunity, a chance to reshape the global economic landscape in favor of China's ambitions. The recent intensification of trade hostilities is a culmination of Xi's long-standing strategy aimed at making the world increasingly dependent on Chinese exports and technology while simultaneously minimizing China's reliance on the West. The roots of this current trade conflict can be traced back to 2020. When Xi and senior Communist Party officials laid out a strategic vision during a critical meeting. They recognized that the tensions with the U.S. were escalating, particularly following the imposition of tariffs and technology restrictions by the Trump administration. The COVID-19 pandemic further exacerbated these tensions, revealing the global economy's heavy reliance on China for essential goods from personal protective equipment to pharmaceuticals. Faced with the prospect of further economic isolation, Xi adopted an assertive approach. Instead of conceding to U.S. demands or opening China's market to foreign investment as previously promised, he called for a strategy to tighten the global supply chain's dependence on China. We must form a powerful capacity to counter and deter foreign parties from artificially disrupting supplies, Xi stated, signaling a pivot towards economic warfare aimed at leveraging China's manufacturing supremacy. This shift was bolstered by substantial financial investments in the manufacturing sector. Over the past 4 years, China's state-controlled banking system has infused nearly $2 trillion into industrial borrowers, fueling an export strategy designed to reinforce China's position as the world's factory. As a result, when the Trump administration launched its latest round of tariffs, China was not defenseless. It retaliated with its own tariffs and imposed export restrictions on critical minerals essential for various industries, including automotive and aerospace. The repercussions of these actions have begun to ripple through the U.S. economy. Reports indicate that prices for critical minerals have spiked, with some increasing threefold since China implemented its restrictions. This surge has prompted concerns among U.S. consumers and businesses alike, as the threat of empty store shelves looms large. Kirsten Astle, a former intelligence advisor, remarked on the shift in leverage, "It's about flipping the leverage so that the world is reliant on China and China is reliant on no one." Despite these aggressive tactics, the U.S. and China find themselves in a precarious position, engaging in a no-holds-barred competition that could redefine global trade dynamics. The impending discussions between the two nations, ostensibly aimed at de-escalating tensions, will likely grapple with the immense challenge of disentangling their intertwined economies. The U.S. has already shown signs of hesitation exempting numerous Chinese goods, including electronics, from tariffs, while China has indicated it may reconsider tariffs on critical imports from the U.S. Yet, the trade war is not without its costs for China. Analysts warn that prolonged conflict could lead to millions of job losses within China, exacerbating an already fragile economic landscape that has been strained by a property crisis and dwindling consumer confidence. Xi's ambition for a powerful, self-reliant China may be undermined by a trade war that threatens to destabilize the very economy he seeks to strengthen. Moreover, the current trade dynamics are forcing nations to choose sides, deepening the rift between the U.S. and China. Evan Medeiros, a professor of Asian studies, highlights the implications of this divide. The entire world is about to learn the answer to a very important question: how reliant are we on trade with China, and how much is it worth to us? The strategic implications of these choices could reshape alliances and influence the global order for years to come. As the world watches the unfolding economic drama, the outcomes of this trade conflict will have lasting repercussions not only for the U.S. and China but for the broader international community. The delicate balance of power is shifting, and how these two superpowers navigate their rivalry will undoubtedly shape the future of global trade and economic relations. The coming months will be pivotal as both nations continue to grapple with the realities of their interdependence and the consequences of their aggressive postures in a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape. The diplomatic maneuvers of nations are attracting increased scrutiny, particularly in contexts characterized by shifting alliances and economic pressures. Recent analyses of Vietnamese leadership under General Secretary To Lam have raised questions about the effectiveness and originality of his diplomatic strategies. Critics argue that Lam's approach, described as pragmatic, may merely be a continuation of Vietnam's historical foreign policy rather than a bold new direction. A recent op-ed highlighted that while Lam is often portrayed as a pragmatic leader advancing Vietnam's global stature, such characterizations may lack substance. The critique suggests that Lam's foreign policy remains largely reactive, shaped by external pressures rather than innovative strategic thinking. Observers note that his tenure has not significantly altered Vietnam's long-standing bamboo diplomacy, a term describing the country's balancing act between major powers. Instead, it appears that Lam has inherited a cautious approach that may not be well suited for today's polarized international environment. The geopolitical dynamics have been further complicated by the recent re-election of Donald Trump as U.S. President, which has brought about a renewed threat of steep tariffs on imports from Vietnam. This situation has led to a precarious position for Vietnam, prompting a series of diplomatic engagements that some analysts view as lacking in strategic depth. For instance, Lam's visits to China and meetings with U.S. officials have been characterized as following an outdated script, lacking the transformative vision that many believe is necessary for Vietnam to assert itself on the global stage. As Vietnam navigates these challenges, it faces significant internal pressures as well. The youth demographic, increasingly disengaged from traditional political narratives, poses a challenge for Lam's administration. This detachment reflects broader societal trends that prioritize personal freedoms and opportunities over state control, suggesting that Vietnam's external ambitions may falter if not supported by domestic renewal. Meanwhile, other nations are employing innovative strategies in their diplomatic engagements. Japan, for example, is leveraging its culinary heritage in what is termed sushi diplomacy to enhance bilateral relations. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba recently hosted Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, showcasing Japanese cuisine as both a cultural ambassador and a tool for fostering trade. This approach underscores a broader trend of nations utilizing soft power and cultural exchanges to strengthen international ties amidst complex security environments. In a related development, China and Russia have solidified their partnership, pledging to counteract what they perceive as bullying and power politics from Western nations. During a recent meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Vladimir Putin, both leaders emphasized the importance of collaboration in international forums like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS. They condemned the unilateral sanctions imposed by certain countries, framing their alliance as a bulwark against Western hegemony. As the global landscape continues to shift, the effectiveness of traditional and emerging diplomatic strategies will be crucial for nations seeking to navigate these turbulent waters. Vietnam's reliance on historical precedents in its foreign policy may prove insufficient in the face of contemporary challenges, while Japan's innovative approaches and the burgeoning China-Russia alliance illustrate the diverse strategies nations are adopting in response to an increasingly complex geopolitical reality. Looking ahead, it will be essential for countries to adapt and evolve their diplomatic strategies to not only survive but thrive in this new world order.